like to thank Loyola and Provost John Pelissaro and all of the staff for hosting this meeting of the board today. Also, I want to thank the Provost and Loyola for hosting a wonderful reception last night. It's a great opportunity to dialogue with many of you. And also a special thanks to Phil Hale for a lot of special requests and accommodations and for all of his help in bringing everything together today. At this time, I would like to welcome Provost Pelissaro for a few remarks.
Thank you. Good afternoon. On behalf of Loyola University Chicago and its president, Father Michael Garanzini, I want to extend a warm welcome to the Illinois Board of Higher Education, to its staff, and to other senior leaders of colleges and universities from throughout the state, members of the higher education community, elected officials, and other guests who are here today. As Loyola's Chief Academic Officer, it gives me particular pride to host you at a time at our university in which we're doing very well. Across our Chicago campuses, here at the Water Tower, at our Lakeshore campus, and at our Health Sciences campus in Maywood, visitors see the amazing transformation that's taken place in our facilities with new and renovated learning and event spaces such as this building, the Corboy Law Center, and the new Schreiber Center for Business that's going up just down Pearson Street, and the new Center for Translational Research and Education in Maywood, which is a medical research and education facility scheduled to open in April of 2016 that will support nearly 500 scientists and staff working together to improve human health in such areas as public health, health services, and epidemiology, areas that couldn't be more timely than right now. Last year, we opened our newest academic and student development facilities at our Lakeshore campus, the Damon Student Center, 2 new freshman residence halls, and a facility that houses our Institute for Environmental Sustainability. We're particularly proud of the work of the Institute, which is committed to developing interdisciplinary, responsible solutions to environmental problems. Over the last several years, the greening of Loyola, and I hope of your campuses as well, is evident in our institutional efforts to advance sustainability in operations across our campuses and to develop an environmentally conscious culture throughout the university. We take further pride in a recent ranking of colleges and universities by the Sierra Club, which places Loyola at number 4 in the U.S.'s greenest colleges. I'm also happy to report that with nearly 16,000 students, our enrollments are strong and our budget is balanced. As such was not the case even 10 years ago. And as you can tell, as Loyola's provost, I relish the opportunities such as today to bask in the light of our success and the health of our institution. But I'm also keenly aware of the changing landscape of higher education. As higher education itself enters a period of uncertainty, any number of issues contribute to sleeplessness and concern. Demographic shifts taking place that will shrink the pool of college-bound high school graduates. A growing national concern regarding the affordability of a college degree. Media reports questioning the quality and outcomes of our enterprise. Reports of rising student debt and loan defaults, and greater scrutiny of the higher education enterprise from federal and state governments and from our regional accrediting agencies. What remains unchanged, however, is the role that we, colleges and universities, can play and should play in preparing our graduates to become engaged and educated citizens, secure meaningful employment, assume positions of responsibility and leadership, and contribute to a greater social good. And I suspect it's what motivates you as well, that satisfaction that comes with knowing that we can make a difference through our work. My very strong belief in the role, in fact the obligation, that colleges and universities have to make differences in the lives of others and contribute to a greater good is a key driver behind my enthusiasm for one of Loyola's latest academic initiatives, known as Arrupe College. If all goes well, and the Higher Learning Commission agrees with us, Loyola is in the process of preparing for what we hope will be a small but significant new class of students beginning next fall. For the first time in our history, we'll offer an Associate of Arts degree. The degree level is new, but the fields of study for Loyola are not: liberal arts, business administration, social and behavioral sciences. And the profile of the student we hope to enroll in this is in keeping with Loyola's decades-long mission of serving first-generation students and the sons and daughters of immigrant families, many, if not most, with low ACT scores. So what is new for us is the development of a structure of services, faculty, and a curriculum designed to exclusively support these students of limited means, with the goal of seeing them through to the completion of their degrees with minimal or no debt. This is an exciting initiative for us, and one to which Father Garanzini, our president, is deeply committed because it's emblematic of the Jesuit mission to support knowledge in the service of humanity and to serve the poor and marginalized. Finally, I might be preaching to the choir, but I can't help but stress the significance that the MAP program has for all of Illinois students in the achievement of their educational goals and the ultimate value that the MAP program provides to the state of Illinois. So welcome again to Loyola. I want to say a special welcome to my former boss, President Wiseman, and to thank all of you for everything you do on behalf of higher education in Illinois. Thank you.
Thank you again. Congratulations are in order to the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign and Chicago campuses, Southern Illinois University, Carbondale and Edwardsville, and DePaul University, who have been recognized by Insight into Diversity magazine for a third year in a row for our commitment to diversity. The institutions will receive the HEED Award, which is the only national award honoring U.S. colleges and universities that demonstrate an outstanding commitment to diversity and inclusion. A total of 83 institutions are being recognized and will be featured in the magazine's November issue. Congratulations. I'd like to also express appreciation to the community college presidents for a great lunch discussion today. And I want to thank Dr. Tom Choice for his leadership, to the Community College Presidents Council, and his participation at our board meetings. Illinois community colleges and their leadership are working to initiate programs to address college success gaps, persistence, and affordability. Together, we will continue identifying strategies that will lead to the success of our students. There are many advantages in my role as chair, including working with all of you to develop and implement strategies to strengthen Illinois' higher education system. However, today I have to perform a disadvantage, although I'm proud to acknowledge someone who is retiring. It's still difficult to say goodbye to someone who has been a pillar of Illinois' higher education community. Today, we acknowledge O-Chang John, who will be retiring from IBHE after 33 years of state service. O-Chang is the Associate Director for Academic Affairs at IBHE and is retiring at the end of this month. He was hired by former Executive Director Dr. Richard Wagner and has been a valuable asset to IBHE. He has conducted hundreds of analyses and reviews of new and existing degree programs, primarily of Illinois public universities, but as well as community colleges, private colleges, and universities. Served as one of the staff reviewers of the Higher Education Cooperation Act, HECA, grant proposals submitted to IBHE. Represented us on the Illinois Workforce Investment Board, served as the IBHE staff liaison to the Disabilities Advisory Committee and the Faculty Advisory Council, and was a founding member of the Illinois Committee on Black Concerns in Higher Education. O-Chang, we applaud you for your service to the IBHE and to the students of the state of Illinois. We wish you well in your much-deserved retirement. Now I will ask Julie Smith, representing the Office of Illinois Governor Pat Quinn, to come forth to present a resolution.
Thanks very much, Lindsay. It's my pleasure to be here today to recognize the work, the litany of things that Lindsay outlined with respect to how much O-Chang has had an impact on higher education over these last 3 decades. The governor extends his congratulations and best wishes. He very much appreciates the hard work and dedication that all of the staff of IBHE reflect in terms of the work that they do in support of higher education, but it is particularly important to take these times and recognize people who have committed really a lifetime to this work. And so in appreciation of all that you have done, we'd like to present you with this certificate of recognition. If I can read it. It says, "This certificate of appreciation is hereby presented to O-Cheng Jani on this 7th day of October in the year 2014 in honor of your impressive career as a dedicated public service and in recognition of your invaluable contributions to the Illinois Board of Higher Education and to countless other education advisory boards. I want to commend you for your commitment and service to instruction, research, and public service at colleges and universities across Illinois. I want to thank you for your steadfast commitment to strengthening Illinois' higher education system and for your 33 years of service and support to the faculty members and students of Illinois colleges." It's signed by Governor Clinton. Thank you very much. You want to say something?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very, very honored and humbled to receive this recognition well beyond my expectation. I just thought I'll come for the last time to say goodbye, but it turned out to be a much bigger surprise. Many of you and many others who are not here have touched and enriched my life at the Board of Higher Education. I work with a lot of variety of people. All of those, even where we had to argue, it was great because it's also good to agree to disagree because no one owns it all. And I've had the pleasure of working with many board members, past and present, and many campus executives. Some of them are here and so on. But all of those have been wonderful. I stayed that long because it was rewarding, it was worthwhile, which is a tribute to each and all of you and Illinois higher education. Thank you very much. I will always remember the agency and all of you. May God bless. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie, and O-Cheng, we're grateful for all that you've done. Turning to the Illinois public agenda, despite moderate gains in college completions for underrepresented students, the gaps for these students have grown over the last 5 years. Through the Reducing Attainment Gaps Action Team, the board is identifying strategies necessary to remodel our higher education system to offer all students, especially underrepresented students, equitable opportunities to earn a college credential. Today, leadership from the action team will discuss existing gaps in educational performance among underrepresented students and successful strategies for eliminating these gaps. The discussion with the board will be led by a panel describing model programs and policies implemented by institutions of higher education. The panel invited to the board meeting today are Dr. Layla Suleiman-Gonzalez, Executive Director for the Illinois Latino Family Commission, Dr. William Trent, a professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, Dr. Elizabeth Libby Rager, Dean of Elgin Community College, and Dominique Raymond, Vice President for Alliance State Relations, Complete College America. Now I will turn it over to Dr. Applegate for the Executive Director's report.
And I'll keep this brief so we can get to the really important discussion. I did want to share some good news with you. We are contributing to the returning adult learner getting their degrees. I wanted to let you know that Jody Hunt and Kyle Smalls completed their master's degree while working with us, and Doug Franklin completed his PhD at ISU while working with us. We've been able to do 8 hires and promotions as we've realigned our staff over the last several months around the priorities that this board has established for Illinois higher education. We spent an enormous amount of time working with our data and information systems and information technology. I think the power of a board like this, really a lot of it lies, we have mandated responsibilities, of course, in statute, but a lot of it is around our ability to take data, turn it into arguments and information for change, and then communicate that effectively. So I wanted you to know we spent a lot of time. We've upgraded all our systems and servers. We've increased our speed and security. We're improving program approval processes. We're now, we just discussed this with the public presidents. The average time at which it takes us to approve a program from the public universities is 4 months, considering you meet only every 2 months. So we felt that we'll continue to work to get better. We're including more data in our institutional profiles. I hope you're having a chance to look at that. We used to provide only 6-year graduation rates and FTE per graduates per 100. We're now including persistence and retention rates. We will soon add default rates, and eventually we will tie this to workforce data, so we'll be able to see what happens to graduates of our institutions across the state. We will be reinstituting. Last year we did not do fall data collection. We will reinstitute fall data collections, discuss that with the presidents at lunch today or this morning, so that we can have up-to-date data to look at as we begin to develop programs and policies that will directly impact. And to increase our visibility and presence in the state, we are in the process of developing a social media strategy, and we will have that in place with a redesigned website shortly. That is, it looks a little bit less like a website that was designed by educators, and a little more like a website that somebody might actually want to go into and visit. The blog that I've been sharing with some of you is just a tiny first step in tweeting that and all of that in that direction. I also wanted to share with you some good news. As many of you have visited our offices, you know that we have this lovely space above a bar and a tattoo parlor. We are moving, and we are working. We're very excited about the possibilities, and we believe we're going to be able to work it out where we will move at no significantly greater cost to a much better space, still in downtown Springfield, still walking distance to the Capitol, where we must spend a lot of our time, but one where instead of a bar and a tattoo parlor, we will share the space with a bank, a law firm, and an architecture firm, and we will have much more functional space that allows for expansion and for our servers and all our data work. So that's going to take a while. I know that surprises you, that it takes a while in state government to make these kinds of changes, but when we get there, we're going to invite you all to come and visit us in our new digs. We are also working very much with our GPS work, and you'll hear more about that in a moment, the Guided Pathways to Success. We're expanding that work with the help of Complete College America, who will be represented here shortly, to talk specifically about new kinds of math pathways for our students. As you know, math is a huge blocking point for many of our students, first generation, students of color, others we're trying to get through. And we're having conversations with our math faculty, bringing in national experts in mathematics to begin to develop alternative pathways. Some of you are familiar with the national work going on through the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching on Mathway, Quantway. And so we'll be working on that. I did want you to know that for myself, I had the opportunity to do the opening keynote at a meeting at Princeton University, co-sponsored by the National Urban League and the Education Testing Service on equity issues, which is, again, relevant to our conversation today. Had the opportunity to meet and talk with some of the best people nationally on this issue, and also to begin to talk about how we might engage our own urban leagues here in Illinois as partners in our work as we move forward. Also had a great opportunity to speak to the about 30 foundations and nonprofits in Chicago recently, organized around the Donors Forum. And we are working with philanthropic leadership here in Illinois to talk about ways in which their investments can align with and support the priorities that you've set as a board. Chair Anderson and I have been doing a little crisscrossing of the state, and we thank our presidents and board chairs from our universities. We haven't met with all of them yet, but we're scheduling that. And it's been a great set of conversations. At SIU, it actually led to then me meeting one morning with the entire system board, and it's providing great opportunities to think about how we work together around advocacy and around implementing the kind of programs that we know are necessary in Illinois to succeed. So that's some of what we've been up to. I sent you an email update recently with a lot more in it, but that's kind of where we are. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Applegate. We will move next actually to the action team reports, and I will ask the conveners of each of those groups to give a very, very brief, just a couple minutes report. And I would just ask, I'm told you have to speak directly into the microphone, so feel free to move them around. But we'll begin the action team reports with Jane Hayes on advocacy.
Thank you. The Advocacy Action Team is focused on initially working with members of the legislature and others to hopefully spark the creation of a higher education caucus in the General Assembly. And yesterday we had, I think, a very productive meeting that was convened just here at Loyola, including members of IBHE, ICCB, the Illinois Senate, the Illinois House, Governor Pat Quinn's office, FICU, ISAC, the public universities, and then Loyola representing the private. So we are hoping to participate in hosting a reception for the General Assembly members on the evening following our next meeting, which will be December 2nd. So more details of that to come. We are also working to develop talking points and a one-page, very brief platform or list of our priorities and then backed up with information that will be available to members of the Illinois General Assembly.
Thank you. Any questions for Jane? Next, President Wiseman for affordability.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Because the concept of affordability and the reality of affordability is so amorphous, the action team decided to develop a plan of action on which to proceed, and it essentially has 4 steps: defining the problem and outlining the facts, identifying the financial, educational needs of students and parents. Once the problem is defined, how do we address or resolve the various issues, and then identifying the outcomes of this particular effort. We have a number of resource people who will be contacted or have been contacted from ISAC, from the Offices of Financial Aid, a for-profit college president, a public university CFO, and after my discussions, particularly with the community college presidents, we will invite a community college president to work with us in particular about identifying the financial educational needs of students and parents. And since I am a representative of the private institutions, I think we will be well represented in terms of our resources.
Thank you. Next, reducing attainment gaps. Robert? Okay. Well, I think
We'll address that when we get to the panel.
we'll save that for the panel. So next, we'll turn to increasing non-traditional and adult completions aligned with the economic needs. Tyler.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. On that, we have established ourselves as the non-traditional learners action team. We've established a mission statement, and going into the non-traditional as a definition so that everybody here in the room has an idea, we use the National Center for Education Statistics definition since it's a nationally recognized source. Working full-time while enrolled, having dependents other than a spouse, are a single parent, lack a standard high school diploma, have delayed enrollment to post-secondary education, attend part-time, and are financially independent of their parents, to include veterans on top of this as our non-traditional focus group. Now, what we're trying to achieve in here is we look at focus groups, such as going on to veterans, prior learning assessment, so we can see about bringing life experience into educational experience, and highlighting strategies for outreach to these non-traditional students as well, and then highlighting successful student supports for non-traditional students. And so what this means is we want to bring people in from not only vocational schools and community colleges across the board, so that we can get a better idea of what we can help establish and what we can support to push for legislation that would greater impact non-traditional students. So that way we can better assist them in completing their educational degrees and goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the action teams? If not, we'll move on to the panel.
Okay. And unless you want to join me up here, we set you up so you can be. Last time people complained that our panelists had their backs to the audience, so we turned it around. They're going to be looking at me. So come on up. Come on up.
Now the board has their backs to the audience.
They don't care about us. So while they're coming up, I'll just say something most of you probably know. The board, based on the public agenda 5 years later analysis, looking at that data, identified 4 priority areas. One of those tied to data that clearly showed us that gaps were increasing for underrepresented students, and we were making very little progress with low-income students, hence the action team was created. And the board also said that it wanted each of its meetings to be focused on one of the 4 priorities. In June, for example, we talked about the adult learner. Today, we're going to talk about strategies, policies and strategies that we need to be thinking about in Illinois to really turn that around and begin to reduce the gaps. We're seeing success in this area in other places around the country and in some spots in Illinois. So we want to figure out how we scale that up and do that in a way that really benefits all of our underrepresented groups. So the first question, we really, when we talked about it this morning, and the action team members there are going to dive in and ask questions and contribute. We had a really dynamic conversation this morning in the action team about some of these issues. I think the panelists have already been introduced to you by our chair, so if it's okay with you guys, I'm not going to reintroduce you, but I do want to open this up first, since we are a policy board, with talking about what we see as some of the policy priorities that need to be addressed to really begin to turn this around and begin to reduce gaps, eliminate gaps, provide equitable opportunity for all students to gain what is an increasingly valuable college degree. I just say as an aside, the Department of Labor in 2013 data points out that 4-year college graduates now make 98% more than high school graduates. That number is getting bigger, faster than we even expected 5 years ago. So we really are talking about giving people a shot at anything like the middle class. So it's really important. And I want to start, Domi, with you from Complete College America, because you've been working with us, obviously. You have a document that you're sharing with people you want to talk about, but you've been working with us in Illinois, but you've also been working in states all across the country to begin to address this issue and do what you're calling game-changing strategies that, as you said earlier this morning, have double-digit impact on reducing these kinds of gaps. So could you talk a little bit about what you're seeing that's really working?
Happy to do that, Jim. Madam Chair, members of the board, thank you for having me here. And so, yes, CCA is certainly working on that. We're a national nonprofit. Our little background is essentially when Warren Buffett addressed Bill Gates and said, hey, take care of all of my money and manage it, what they did is they created a post-secondary ed success division, of which CCA was launched from that money along with a number of other organizations. Our entire bandwidth is to help states move on college completion, full stop. And so along the way with that, with policy, we started with 7 states, and now we're up to 33 states, the District of Columbia, and also a U.S. territory, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, to prove that the issue of college completion is critically important. It's such a big problem that, again, we were talking earlier, you should continue to do everything that you're doing on completion without question. But if you're only seeing 1 or 2 percentage increases in student success, it is not going to solve this nationwide crisis that we have that essentially is a return on investment. So CCA took a look at the data. We ended up having to create our own set of data with the SHIA organization, Jim's group, and the like, because we realized that the IBHE, which everybody knows is the post-secondary ed division data, doesn't capture everything that you need. So at the heart of this is how are your Pell students doing? How are your students over the age of 24 doing? What about your part-timers? Those who are in remediation, are they persisting to move forward from there? And there's no way of really knowing that, and so that's why we collected it. So we collected these game changers. What are the game changers? It's what's happening in Illinois, across the country. People who are using data to make informed decisions that are showing double-digit gains in student success. And I'm going to do my best Vanna White. Everyone has this, perhaps. It's also on our website. And if you look to page 2, essentially the game changers are listed on here. And it's really just quickly 5 elements. Performance funding and data create conditions for change, co-requisite remediation. If your students don't complete English and math in the first year, they will not persist. They just won't persist. And when we say math and English, we mean the gateway college level math, not remediation. Co-requisite remediation means that they're getting just-in-time support. You're not doing it as a prerequisite, but a co-requisite. Full-time is 15. You know, it is simple math. If you want students to finish on time, we're not saying accelerated time. They need to do at least 15 credits a semester or 30 a year, if they can do it. This is really around informed choice. Structured schedules and guided pathways to success. Again, we really look at what Illinois is doing as a bellwether. We had a great competition with some Helmsley grant money that we received, and Illinois was one of the winners of many. So the institutions that are doing that in terms of GPS and STEM are the city colleges of Chicago, as well as SIU Carbondale and UIC. Just really, how do you create these interrelated and interdependent strategies that are policies that work on the state as well as the campus level? And so really it's those three essential elements: double-digit gains, having students and campuses make informed choices based on the data, and then how do you make certain that they're all interrelated and interdependent, those strategies that you are working on, and that's where we've seen great success. I'll pause there.
Okay. Any immediate reactions from the board or questions before I want to give some of our other panelists a chance to talk about some of the things they're seeing from a policy and, for that matter, a practice perspective that's making a real difference. But any immediate questions or issues from board members? Yeah, Jay?
I would just say that your first item is performance funding. You know, we've been working on that here in Illinois for several years now. And I think we're probably a little quandary as far as how to proceed. Maybe some aren't, some are. But I guess the real question I have for you, if you have the answer to this, is what has been most successful in performance funding? Has it been taking maybe a small percentage of the higher ed budget, percent or two, and then allocating it on that, or is it matter of starting small and then going up to maybe 5 or 10%, or is it starting at a higher point, maybe 5 or 10%, or even greater? I'd like your comments, please.
Sure. So the states that we think that are doing them well are Indiana and Ohio and Tennessee. A couple of things that they do. Number one is it affects their base and not discretionary money. The second is that they actually started rather aggressively. In some instances, some have as high as 25%, not in all areas. The other big thing is it's the keep it simple rule for this. It's really important that everyone needs to be able to explain what the performance funding is. If it gets too convoluted in terms of like percentages this and that and the other, we just find that states have said that it's been very complicated. If an advisor can't read it, if a president can't read it, then it's very, it's just not really helpful. The other final thing I'll mention on that is that you incent what matters. And so what performance funding is, because we know we use terms like hold harmless and all these other things, it is an investment strategy in the state, is what it is. So we went ahead and asked our good friend Dennis Jones, some of you may know him, he's with NCHEMS, to put together a little...
They did the 5 years after report for us.
Oh, perfect. So you know Dennis.
Board knows Dennis very well.
My little side story, got lost out of Logan Airport, ended up in Maine with Dennis accidentally in a car, so it was just fantastic. But he's terrific, and he just knows everything. So we went ahead and asked them to put together, the NCHEMS folks, to quickly put together a fact sheet for us about why it is an investment strategy, and then the do this items. Really, it's this idea of use hard numbers and not percentages. Speaking with Layla and others earlier, there was a campus in the Southwest that said, look, we've increased our Latino population in STEM by 100%. When you go from 2 students to 4, that's not a good number, you know, so it's the keep it simple rule. So I'm happy to share the documents with IBHE to share.
Yeah, I mean, as some of us know, that there is a performance funding committee, and if you could share the document with the staff, and we could look at it at our next committee meeting, I think would be very helpful.
Okay. So to some of the other panelists, Dr. Suman, I know that you're working with the Latino Family Commission around issues. You mentioned the task force that's being created this morning. I mean, what are you seeing as I know you're doing a self-study and gathering data, but what are you seeing as some of the real, I'll just keep using the game-changing language of CCA, some real things we should be thinking about as a board around our underrepresented students, and particularly our hugely, vastly growing Latino population.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and discuss these issues of such importance to the Latino community and to the whole state. So just to put it in context, I'm going to share just a couple of data points with you. So there are over 2 million Latinos in the state of Illinois. 40% of those Latinos are under 18. We're 1 out of every 4 kids in the state right now, but rapidly growing to, at least in the Cook County area, we're already 1 out of 3 babies born. So I think that has a lot of implications for what happens to the future and how we get from here to 60% by 2025. Especially, and I also want you to know that 44% of CPS is Latino kids right now. So in the city of Chicago, it's even higher concentration. So how do we get from where we are to 60% when Latinos are only 12% of 4-year bachelor's degrees? Only 3.2% of Latinos have a master's or above. When we look at the labor market, we know that most jobs, 67% of the jobs require some certificate or degree in order to get into the labor market, but Latinos only have 17% of us have a certificate or a degree. So we're at a 50% skills gap right now. How do we narrow that gap? So I do want to congratulate IBHE, and especially under the leadership of Dr. Applegate, that we're actually looking at achievement gap. Because quite often what happens, and this is part of our conversation during lunch, is that when you use the general data and you look and it looks like it's trending upwards, when you disaggregate the data and you start looking at individual groups, you see that you're not moving quite as fast as you need to be moving. So I think that's really important, not to just lump all students of color together. I mean, that's important as a indicator, but you do need to look at individual groups within students of color, because it's going to be a little bit of a different reality. Obviously, our educational profile, it's different. So looking at the data by subgroups is one of the, I think, important recommendations. You need to know exactly how Latino students are doing, where they've been, and how they're moving forward. So we know that 70% of Latinos who graduate high school enter college. However, the tragic thing is that they're not really graduating. Why are they not graduating? That's the question of the self-study. To really understand what our public universities and colleges doing, what are those game changers? So thank you for bringing that concept, because I think that's really helpful. What are those game-changing strategies, those game-changing practices? Unfortunately, a lot of times, the lack of success of Latinos in terms of completion gets sort of couched in the cultural issues. And I do want to, I think, state very firmly that I don't think there are cultural issues in terms of what kids or families don't have. I think what kids and families don't have are more socioeconomic than cultural. I think the cultural piece comes in when the institution is not changing to be able to address the cultural makeup of its population that's coming in. So if you don't understand your customer, you cannot serve your customer. If you don't understand the community and cannot connect to the community. So there is a cultural mismatch. But if we're going to wait until Latinos change their culture so that somehow magically it matches, I think we're going to wait a very long time. I think it's the institution that really needs to begin changing. And some of the ways that the institution can change is really to begin reaching to the K through 12 system and begin building those bridges. That's really important, because they're not going to magically appear in the doorstep, college ready and career ready, if we're not developing more seamlessness, more transitions. I think once they get to the campus, or even the year before, is creating those steps and ladders so that they're ready to go. And we're not, a lot of our kids are spending 1, 2, 3 years in remedial. They're not going to graduate. I can, you said it in terms of the data that you've looked at. If you're spending 1 or 2 years in remedial and you're spending all that money, you already see that you're in debt and you don't have one college credit that's going to get you to graduation, you get disenfranchised and you get disappointed and disillusioned. You're not going to continue. So there are a lot of structural pieces, I think, that the institutions have to look at. I think that and what we're learning from some of the studies as we do more research is that it's important for the institution to honor and support the cultural identity of the students and the parents and the community. So we are very much, in terms of our cultural values, we are about familism and we're very collective. So it's important to create those supports that are in a collective nature, help students move along together, because in each other they find similar situations, support, but they also need mentors and a space. Unfortunately, we're seeing too many college campuses where those spaces where it's for Latino students, there's no funding for them, or somehow they're being now moved into diversity spaces. Well, that doesn't offer the same type of support that the Latino Student Center offers, where students can go, they have similar experiences, and they have adults that have gone through the experience. I'm a graduate of Loyola University. I studied in this very same building. I'm a first-generation student. I was lucky that I plugged into the Latino Student Association right away, so I had somewhere to go. And in the multicultural office, there was a Latina who was an advisor who understood, because she herself was first generation, what it took for me to negotiate being here and who I had to be here versus who my family knew me as and how they understood my experience. So many times I came to her office knocking at her door, almost in tears, saying, how do I negotiate this? They want me to do this, but in order to succeed in the university, I have to do that. And she would help me through it, as will other students. That's important. It's intangible. It's not the kind of thing that maybe we're going to get hard numbers on, but it creates a welcoming culture at the university that says, we're here with you and we're going to support you to the end. Now, we got you here. Now you're on your own. Be a grown-up and succeed. I often hear a lot of people saying, we don't have to handhold students. Well, when it's a new experience and they don't have the family or the community background that says this is what we do and this is your next step, then we kind of do.
Dr. Trent, something you said this morning, and I think it echoes what you just said, which is we spend a lot of time trying to fix students so they match our institutions as they are. We need to flip that a little bit and talk about how we change the institutions to adapt to our students. You may want to build off that, or you've done so much work and research in this area, but I'd be interested in your thoughts about what are the kind of policy and practice priorities that we need to be zeroing in on? And at the end of this, I really want to come back to what this board can do, but I think it's good to talk in general about what are we seeing as being important in this space, and I'll get to you about the bridge piece in just a moment. Yeah.
Well, the first thing I want to do is, of course, to thank the board for the invitation to be here, but also I want to underscore the fact that we have a game changer in Illinois in the MAP program. And the MAP program has a rich, wonderful history, especially when it was approaching being fully funded. And I think we have to readdress our attention to thinking about the ways in which we can do what we can to restore MAP. It is it is need-based aid, and that's an essential component. Many of the students who will be necessary to be able to reach 60 by 25 are students who have very little expected family contribution. And that's factual. I talked with the president of an institution where my first grandson off to college is gone. And she was telling me that the students, she has a substantial student of color, minority student population on her campus. It's a private school. Students are making an excellent transition to the school, but the expected family contribution in years 2, 3, and 4 is not there. The families simply don't have it. So we have talented students who are going to be dropping out of school or reducing the amount of full-time load they can carry because of the cost of attendance. We need to find ways, again, of understanding how we can restore MAP to being the quality of game changer that it can be. The other piece, speaking of this issue of what we've seen that works, we're currently completing a study of students in STEM across higher education institutions. And a couple of things have been identified in terms of fixing the institution. What was disappointing to find was that very few of the institutions had a logic model, a theory of change. They have interventions, but they did not have a theory of change or a logic model that helped explain to anyone how they plan to get from that intervention to graduation, a causal logic. I only found one institution in looking at 14 different campuses that talked clearly about a logic model, having a sense of why we're doing what we're doing in order to produce the desired outcomes. A colleague of mine says you have to inspect for what you expect. The second thing that was a disturbance to me was the absence of any request for annual evaluations, so that many of the places that have interventions, people working diligently to facilitate the success of the students, the institutions themselves are not requesting that evaluation material so that they actually know what those interventions are doing. So while they may have a financial investment in the activity or in-kind support for the intervention, it's unclear that they have a full commitment to the success of that intervention for the students who are being served. I think those things can be addressed. That's low-hanging fruit. It's very important that we disaggregate. The situation confronting males of color, Black and Latino, is fundamentally different from what other students experience in higher education. Our failure to disaggregate data will continue to allow certain kinds of problems to persist. And we need to be fully conscious of that and fully aware of the implications of that. So there are issues with structural conditions that predispose males in particular, Black and Latino, to very different school experiences. And it's fundamentally reducing the size of the pool of students who could contribute to that 60 by 25. And that just, we can't just walk away from that.
Again, I want you to talk about what you're doing that's such a, I think is a game changer, but any comments or questions from the board at this point? Yes?
The last two speakers' comments interested me very much. I saw, however, a built-in conflict. You want cultural identity and you want also faster cultural change. And one should realize that culture always lags behind. Technology moves much faster. And by the time culture catches up, technology has moved even further away. And the second thing that Dr. Trent mentioned is about theory of change. Actually, there is no theory of change, not anything that's satisfactory, intellectually speaking. Some changes are linear, some changes are unilinear, some changes are curvilinear, some change happens and then comes back. So these are very stimulating discussions, I think, and if we can find a measure that is halfway satisfactory, it should be very, very acceptable to us.
I'll address the issue of the cultural change of the institution. And I think you see, and we talked a lot about this in the morning discussion, is what's the carrot and what's the incentive? What's the structural driver that says to the institution that creating supports or creating a different culture of support or of academic achievement for this particular group of students makes sense. Now, I would give as an example where universities have seen that international students are a good revenue source and that's a driver, that they make the changes to facilitate international student growth in their campuses and to allow them the supports to graduate. So it can be done. I think we have to figure out what the incentive and the carrot is, and we talked a lot about that earlier. What incentivizes a university to say graduating Latinos or graduating Black and Latino males is something that is important to us and we're going to achieve that goal?
I want to give you a chance to talk about, you're working across your institution, you're forming partnerships, the issue of preparation has been raised. A lot of times, as we said this morning, sometimes the preparation conversation can be a distraction in that higher ed can say, well, if K-12 would just prepare the students correctly, we could do our job, and it doesn't lead us to a conversation about what we need to do, and I know you are doing this, so perhaps you could talk a little bit about what you're doing in partnership with other folks.
Sure. Let me begin by thanking the board and Madam Chairman for this opportunity today. Elgin Community College takes a two-pronged approach to it. What we want and desire is college readiness for all students who live in District 509. And we go two ways about that. The first way is to try to work with the students, their families, and the community and the K-12 districts in a K-12 environment. So we created in 2006, based on data, our Alliance for College Readiness rate. When we looked at the overall rate for the district being 25% college readiness for students. I'm proud to say that in 2008, or in 2014, we've raised that 15 percentage points. That's been done primarily through discussions, volunteer activities, committee work, based upon data and decisions made to help improve that K-12 atmosphere. A good example would be the creation of a fourth-year math course. We, 3 years ago, gave each K-12 district in District 509 a national clearinghouse data sharing membership, and they agreed to share data with Elgin Community College and with each other. And what we found was that 85% of the students that came to Elgin Community College who were not math ready had not taken a fourth-year high school math course. And so what we did was to get faculty from the math K-12, we got community college faculty and faculty from NIU to create a new fourth-year high school math course that worked and was quant-based. This past year was the first year of that course. It was adopted by 2 school districts, had over 600 students participating, and we had 75% of the students who took that class move up at least one level in college mathematics preparation. That's just one really good example of what we've been able to do to move, because of those conversations, the sharing of that data, and to look at very specific data to make a decision that helped move these students forward. So we have the Alliance for College Readiness, and then on a college level, we're working to, if we do have students not move to college level, to move them through in an accelerated fashion, and we also look at the affective factors. So what we really want to do is to touch these students who are not prepared for college and their family and help them understand what they need to do to get prepared. The program that Dr. Applegate refers to that we work with now for bridge students is called the Transition Academy. We found when we looked at the movement up the dial for college readiness that our students of color were not moving up at the same rate. The increase for them has been 5% rather than the overall 15%. And so what we did was to create a transitional program for students of color within District 509, regardless of where they choose to go to college, where students come to Elgin Community College's campus one Saturday of the month and are taught by grade level by a high school teacher and a college teacher, at least one of the teachers being a student of color. It's not simple remediation that we're doing, but it's really affective pieces and the creation of that cultural capital. We also have a volunteer mentor program for those students so that each student who participates in the program has a community-based mentor that meets with them during the lunch hour that we have the program. We have corporate business partners that volunteer to work with us on business problems. So in the summer, students participate in real-life business scenarios. Last summer, our students created a banking product for Wintrust for high school students. They're all pieces that go together from around the community that we serve that are helping create that college-going network for our students. And we also can include a parent component. So the factors that we've talked about earlier with Layla across the board, we're trying to address so that we are drilling down, looking at the cultural needs of these students, trying to capture and help them be made aware of a different type of learning situation so that when they get to us, they have a more likely, they're more likely to succeed.
Sure, go ahead.
I just want to point out, I know that we're talking specifically about closing the attainment gaps, but everything that everyone has mentioned here helps all students. So it's not something that's being created as a separate silo that we're going to help, students that are underrepresented from underrepresented groups, whether it's Hawaii, with Hawaii, it's underrepresented groups are Cambodians, or if it's in Maine, it's students that are rural. It's this idea, how do you create these interrelated and interdependent strategies that will definitely help those students who need it the most, but actually ends up helping all students, including the high performers.
I think that's a great point. I mean, it's kind of all boats rise with this. I did want to do it through our work with Complete College and our partners with these game changer and guided pathway systems. Remediation was mentioned here. We know in Illinois, 65% of underrepresented students end up in remediation. I've often referred to, let me say first, some of the developmental educators are some of the most caring teachers I've ever met, so it's not their problem, it's a systemic problem. Right. But on the other hand, it is the Bermuda Triangle of higher education. I mean, we send students into remedial education and they never come out, and we don't know what happens to them. But I will do the work with Complete College. I understand that as of fall 2015, one of our institutions will have eliminated zero credit mathematics in their institution through they didn't get any new money for this, but they reallocated, and now all students will go into credit-bearing mathematics. Those who test as not quite needing some help will get the co-requisite supplemental instruction. So this can be done. We had several of you mentioned data. Many of our institutions are moving in the direction of predictive analytics and other kinds of better student data systems. And so we had an institution who said they discovered, for example, in looking at 10 years of predictive data, in some of their pathways, and we want to talk some more about transparency in pathways, that if students didn't get certain courses at certain times in their, by the end of the first semester of their sophomore year, data would suggest they had a 90+% chance of being there for 6 years. So that by not taking those courses, they were making a $20,000 decision. Now, the students didn't know that for sure, and the institution didn't know that till they looked at their data. And so now, the way they're setting it up is, if you haven't enrolled in those courses, those milestone, as they call them, courses, by the right time, first you get an email, then you get a phone call, and then, before you can register, you have to go meet with an advisor, as I understand it, and have all this explained to you. So you are knowingly making a $20,000 decision, not knowingly making a $20,000. Oh, well, and the other thing that these institutions are doing, I think, which is part of the game-changing work with Complete College, a number of higher education institution leaders have pointed out that, so we all do advising, but most of our advising resources get directed to, if you think of a normal curve, to the two tails of the curve. It gets directed to students who are already on the way out, and we're doing triage and trying to either help them exit or, it's emergency situation. Or it's the students at the other end who are going to graduate anyway. They just show up every 2 weeks to make sure they're on track. What doesn't get attended to is what one of our provosts in one of the Complete College programs calls the murky middle. The students who really could benefit from intervention and advising at this point. So intrusive advising, not just intrusive advising, but targeting that advising at the students who really need, where it could make a difference. It could keep them on the path or let them walk off the path to graduation. So I think these are some of the kinds of things that good data let you do. And it is a logic model that says, to Dr. Trent's point, that says, here's how this is going to get this student to a degree. So are there other questions? I want to get the board involved as much as possible. Other questions or comments or thoughts around these issues?
I do, Executive Director, have a question around the structural changes that Mr. Trent spoke of and the impact on that. Can you drill down a little bit so that we can have a better understanding of structural changes that are adversely impacting the groups you spoke to? And Ms. Gonzalez, if you can supplement that as well, I think it would be helpful.
Well, this again forces attention on the need for collaboration between the two levels, K-12 through post-secondary. I mentioned earlier in a discussion amongst us that there's an old article I used to use by Harold Hodgkinson that talks about our educational systems being all one system. And the idea is that students move through that system whether we see it as that or not. There are some things that are structural factors that may be beyond the reach of the Illinois Board of Higher Education per se. Illinois remains one of the most segregated states in housing and in our schools. It is concentrated with a number of hyper-segregated schools. Many of those kinds of factors and patterns that we see are the result of existing policies in housing and in school allocation practices and policies. Those can be fixed, changed. They can be done. They can be done differently. So there are structural changes of that sort. At the university level, we have analyzed and evaluated our financial aid policies. We did this 3 years ago. And we have a presidential awards program. So the concern was, how would we use a strategy that would either increase the numbers of students that were coming in, that is to make it more focused on access, or how would we use it to incentivize faster time to degree and overall completion. So these are policy decisions about how to allocate the funds. And we're collecting data on that now in terms of how the students who've been impacted by the changes we've implemented over the last 2 years. And I have to say, there were two camps. One camp wanted to make it more merit. One camp wanted to make it, keep it based on need and actually increase the quality of the aid. Right now, the second camp is leading in terms of what we're seeing in the data. There seem to be problems with having changed it into a merit-based program. Now, some of us anticipated that because of experience we had with the Gates Millennium Scholarship Funds. Gates Millennium Scholarship Funds were great. It's a last dollar award. It's need-based. Students have to have both the GPA to qualify, and they have to have eligibility for Pell Grant. About 1,000 students are assisted every year. What we discovered was that students who are the recipients of the Gates Millennium Scholarship do not work. Those who do work, they work a minimum number of hours. They have more time for study, more time for academic engagement, more time for becoming college students, but certainly more time to be engaged with faculty outside of class and so on. The research demonstrates that. So I think those are policy decisions that affect the structure of our aid policies, which have a cascading effect on the quality of educational experience that the kids can have. So when we're looking at what we want to tweak, when we have the resources to be able to do it, I think we can be advised by the research and make wiser decisions about how to move the money. And again, thinking about MAP, I think using MAP to incentivize access and to support access is a policy decision, structural decision, that can have major game-changing kind of impact. Because I think we gain a benefit by getting more students a taste of the apple. And I think in many places that works. That gives the students incentive to understand that they can do college work and that there's a college place for them.
There's quite a few, I think, recommendations, but I'm going to highlight a few of them. I think it's we need to look at accessibility, affordability, adaptability, and analysis. And we've touched upon some of these in different ways. So accessibility is asking the question, who are we reaching and who can get to our doors, right? So we know, for example, just like in the housing market, students, Latino students in particular, are very much a target of non-accredited institutions and for-profit institutions. And actually, Lisa Madigan is looking at this issue right now. She's been looking at it for several years because they're particularly targeted. So somehow they do a good job of getting to those students and convincing them that going to college, or at least going to that technical institution, is a good idea, and signing all the loan papers. And then after that, they might get 1 or 2 years, but they get no college placement. So someone, at least from that perspective, knows how to attract the students and get them to their door. So I think we have to learn, and we've heard some examples here. So how do we make it accessible? How can we make sure that we're recruiting and building the bridges so they can get to our doors? Affordability, we have to explore dual credit. We have to explore how to increase, for example, we have the DREAM Act in the state of Illinois for undocumented students. We have the DREAM Commission that's trying to increase scholarships. Congratulations to Loyola, who has 7 undocumented students now going to the School of Medicine, 7. So it's not a lack of desire, it's not a lack of will, it's not a lack of goal setting. Quite often for a lot of these students, and that's where MAP comes in, it's a lack of the financial wherewithal to be, especially the EFC, right, to be able to get into college. I'll give you an example. There's my EFC, we're talking about this, it was 0, but Loyola cobbled together a good package that was doable for me to come here. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to come here. I mean, is that really that simple? Yes or no? Adaptability, and we've talked a little bit about that. How does the institution become more adaptable to the new demographic and the new changes? What does it need to do different? How does it need to work? And we talked a little bit about partnerships earlier. Work different with the K through 12 system, work different with the families, work different with the community. And then the analysis, we talked a little bit about. Doing the analysis, I think the example that you mentioned, and I would guess it's either Arizona or New Mexico. I haven't seen the data, but when you rely on averages without seeing the raw number, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. You have to really use the data that you have. We talked at our table a lot about the fact that ideally we would have a complete seamless data system that would take us P through 20, and we know what Juan Sanchez, how he started in kindergarten and how he ended up in terms of his career and his salary. We're building towards that, the longitudinal data system. I think you're all aware of that. But we're not quite there yet. So we can't wait until that's built to start looking at the data that we have right now. And, most institutions have institutional research units, but we've got to say, you know what, we're going to create the space to look at this data and ask the data where we're at, and then figure out with partners, with experts, with advocates, how are we going to get to a better place, how are we going to move towards the double digits. There's a Dr. Valenzuela, I believe she's in Texas right now. She talks about the fact that school is a subtractive experience, a subtractive schooling. That means Latinos get into the school system and they end up having things removed from them, particularly that cultural capital and even some of the social capital, as opposed to adding things. So how can the institutions begin to work with the students as they come to be able to add to their experience and to them as professionals? We've touched very little about the adult learner, but it's another great opportunity, I think, to...
Well, I think one of the things I keep trying to point out is these are not disconnected initiatives. When you talk about the adult learner, that's a very diverse population, and we have to make sure and disaggregate and make sure that all adults, adults of color, low-income adults, in fact, many of them will be, because that's who we've been dropping out over the years, that many of them will be, in fact, benefited as adult learners by many of the things you guys are talking about here today.
And I think we discussed in one of our first meeting, the idea of the 2-generation approaches.
Yes.
That one way to build the pipeline is to work with the parents. So if they're getting certificates or they're beginning to get their associates, then it's harder for them not to encourage their children to continue, because now they have a taste of what that additional education looks like.
I should add that one of the recommendations that came out of the first MAP report was a recommendation that students not just get the award, but that there should also be advising that goes with it, counseling and advising. And it's advising not just about the financial aid package, but certainly about that also. But in many instances, the students are still relatively under-informed about the nature of the college-going process. And it's important that they become more sophisticated about it. Like the example that was used regarding what happens if you don't take the courses in the right sequence. Well, that adds a semester to a year to your college going. And for a first-generation college student, that's not easily available knowledge. So one of the things we recommended was that the ISAC staff members who worked with providing some of the counseling, that they actually begin to partner with agencies like the funded TRIO programs, Talent Search, Upward Bound, Special Services for Students, because those are structures that expand the capacity of ISAC to be able to provide those sorts of services. And I think those are examples of the kinds of partnerships that the board could encourage and to some extent find a way to increase the utility of.
Just a quick note also about looking at those funding streams that are available. So one that is available is Title V, the HSI funding, the Hispanic Serving Institution. I think we have 17. I think we have 17 in the state of Illinois. So because they now have that federal funding stream, what's happening there? Are they doing better? How are they being good exemplars with that additional funding stream to support Latino students?
Yeah.
I'd like to ask whether any of you has had any experience with a regional approach as opposed to a university-specific approach or a state approach, because some of us have been wondering whether the efficacy lies more in the regional area because there are differences, among the institutions and the regions in which they operate.
The answer is yes. Depending on the state, some states have really strong governance structures where it's somebody that's over the whole thing, or you get to state by the sum of its local parts, and where there's an agreement of sorts, a gentleperson's agreement, that there are going to be shared indicators of what it is that they're going to do, and it's what Jim had mentioned earlier, in a session earlier. This is around goal setting, and more important, what's your role in making this goal happen? And the only way you can really do that, it's not even really necessarily just a campus issue, it's actually a regional issue. In some instances, we have regions that actually cross state lines, and then it's supported by everyone. A great example, it's Pittsburgh and Youngstown, Ohio, or you have Maryland with Gettysburg, areas around Frederick, Maryland, and the like. But there is this issue of that all of this has to help feed that larger goal. I do think, just a little background, I was in Pennsylvania, the Department of Ed for ages, and that's a big state that really has no governance structure, 501 school districts. The vast majority of the K-12 school districts fund the community colleges, which is very tricky. And so the way they, in Pennsylvania and in other places realized that they could do the work was through regional career education partnerships. What was going on in Allegheny was not maybe necessarily what was going on in Allentown and the Lehigh Valley, but it was critically important that it all fed back to the state in Harrisburg, to the governor's initiative, to the higher ed leadership. Otherwise, you just have a patchwork quilt that doesn't really match. So it's not in terms of a conjunction, it's not an or. It's not you do regional or you do state or you do institution. It's all and. You do all of them at the same time, and you make certain that there are indicators that all, you're not going to get 100% of the indicators to agree, but you have to have some common elements that then can help feed the state goal, and then ensure everyone has a stake in terms of this important investment.
It's a little bit like strategic planning. I mean, it is a strategic plan. There needs to be a strategic plan, whether it's regionally or at the state level, for how you're going to address the gap?
One of the ways we talked about that earlier was to recognize that, you know, we faced the challenge and met the hurdle of setting a vision and articulating what that vision is. But it perhaps would be even more beneficial if we knew how each of the sectors, institutional sectors at the higher education level, would contribute to different aspects of that goal. I mean, it could actually be fairly clearly articulated, like, do we know what to expect based on the demographics of the southwestern region of the state? I mean, we know that there's probably a lot of yield that can come from this northeast quadrant of the state. So that would impact resource allocation to some extent. It could inform and provide evidence for how MAP could be used in a really strong way if we had that kind of data use, monitoring, an actual strategy and plan for accomplishing those goals, and we could talk about those goals in terms of formative accomplishments as opposed to waiting for summative, you know, sort of final outcomes. And we could tweak different areas.
I totally agree, and I think, again, you have with IBHE, with ICCB, and others, this opportunity to make that happen. I mean, all 50 states in the U.S. territories have these same kind of regions. I mean, little Rhode Island has separate regions. And it's understood that everything then feeds in here. I'll give you an example. So Nevada, everyone assumes that Nevada is 100% gambling, that it is, you know, you don't need a college degree. That's actually their culture issue. You don't need a college degree that you can be a valet and earn $100,000 in tips, you know, which is outrageous. Of course it's outrageous. When you look at the state, it's entirely bifurcated. The upper area around Reno is really mining history. They're trying to develop wind technology. There's big construction, as we know. There are issues with border issues with California and the whole brain drain as anybody has. And that's how they ended up having to really realize that their state issue is actually regional issues in the context of how then does that feed it. They use their community college system as well as their version, INCHE, which is the Nevada State System of Higher Ed, to get those regional discussions going, but then it's still a state issue. And I think that that's exactly what Illinois could easily do. Karen had mentioned earlier, in a session earlier, about the Workforce Opportunity Investment Act. Did I get that right? Innovation, you know, the former WIA, the new
WIOA.
That's right. WIOA. And what a great opportunity to create education and workforce plans that are regionally focused. So I think, without question, you know, Christine, this is something that you can really get going and happening. State size makes no difference whatsoever.
I have two questions that are unrelated. First, Mr. Trent, I'm glad that you brought up the possibility of having advisement with the MAP grant, because that's coincidentally something that we talked about in our action team for affordability this morning, that, you know, a student's life can be very complicated, and there is a lot of complexity behind financial aid that they may not be aware of until it's too late. And, you know, I use Loyola for an example because I used to go here, and that for their full-time freshmen, they require that you sit down with your first-year advisor and do a 4-year plan for your academics. But I don't think, and here I'm at Roosevelt right now, I'm familiar with DePaul, I don't think anyone sort of institutionalizes a 4-year plan for financial planning, and that, of course, when you're admitted, you get the financial aid award that shows how much you'll owe at the end of the day after scholarships, merit, or need-based, but to cover the balance to actually make sure you are enrolled for the classes, I think it would be useful that the schools perhaps, and I had to talk about it with the board and think about it, but perhaps offer financial advising. Not just, you know, this is the difference between a loan and a grant, but, you know, what's your unique situation? Let me sit down with you and see, do you have a plan in place for either your family or yourself, if you're independent, of how you're going to cover the balance for the next 4 years so that you don't run into issues, so that, you're a junior, you decide to change your major, it's probably going to add about a year's worth of credit. Let's make sure we're on track here so that you don't bump up against the MAP grant, aggregate limit of 135, so that you don't bump up against the academic progress for Pell Grant. So, that's something that I would definitely like to discuss. I'm glad that you brought that up. Now, Mr. Raymond, I wanted to ask you about performance funding. You have, I don't know, I think it's 26 states that are implementing it in some way, shape, or form. Have you seen any positive results from that? How is that really impacting incentivizing the goals that they should be incentivized to do?
Let me,
go ahead.
Let me just pick up on what you were saying. I think it is increasingly important that the institutions do this. I'm not sure that ISAC has actually published those materials, but there was a survey done of each of the colleges and campuses participating in the second MAP commission, so that we have a bit of an index on which campuses actually provide counseling and advising about financial aid when the students come in. But your point also underscores the importance of it for the most at-risk users, because we have such default rates, especially at places where students who are very vulnerable have a high probability of exiting with all of their aid gone and no credential. So it becomes very important in those contexts that someone have real responsibility for very clear, assertive counseling with and advising with those students. And I think we can, in most campuses, we know who those individuals who are most likely to be most vulnerable are. So I really appreciate you underscoring that.
And before I answer performance funding, to Bill's point, everything that we've talked about today is really around students having all the information that they need to make an informed choice. And that it's not, I don't remember who said it, but that data is not, anecdotes are not data. So when we say that, if you go part-time all the time, you have less than a 10% chance of graduating. You as a student should know that, and the data comes from the National Students Clearinghouse, or that remediation is a buzzkill for the vast majority of students. You need to know that information before you start, or that even when we know all those things that we in higher ed leadership or advocacy or on campuses, what are we going to do to then help the majority of students get through these big behavioral economics, uninformed choice buckets, which is exactly what's been happening. So a great example with the aid is MDRC is a research organization out of New York, and they realized that students were eating through their Pell money in the first 2 to 3 weeks. Yes. So a lot of that, for example, is you could have, you could get all the Pell money that you need to carry you through the 4 years, but if you're using all your money in the first 3 weeks, it has the same effect as if you had very limited amount of money given to you on the front end. So they've created something called Aid Like a Paycheck. They're trying to figure out how do you create a structure where financial aid money comes in every 2 weeks like a paycheck, and they're testing it out in a couple of states. So it's a whole bunch of, it's not just that one thing, but driving all of it is the informed choice, like Libby was talking about, what the students need to use. And then in terms of your question with regards to performance funding, we have seen success, and the successes that we've seen are really those that have kept it simple, and most important, that the state then, using their goals, have said, you know what, we've got a shortage of STEM degrees in our state. We're going to weight this percentage to say, we want students to graduate in STEM. If you have students graduate in STEM, you get a 0.1% more, or something like that. We've also seen it not work in some cases, particularly for those that embedded in their performance funding measure enrollment more than they did completion, because we all know there was a big uptick in the number of students enrolling when the economy was really tanking, and now we're starting to see It's started to level off a little bit. California is struggling, we know. Like they have a number of students who want to get into their institutions that they can't. They have high enrollments, but Utah, here's a cultural thing. So Utah, with the Latter-day Saints, they recently just made a shift to when students start their mission. And it's drastically affected their enrollment numbers. So the key with performance funding or any of these game changers or any of the work that we're all working on is it has to be evaluated and monitored. You can't create something and then say, oh, it's done, and not look at the numbers to help make informed decisions.
For the ones that you saw some degree of success, how much of a percentage, I think this is a little bit to Jay's question, how much of a percentage is performance funding compared to the overall higher education spending in that state?
So it's been, I better not create a number. I'm happy to send you the information, but it's not low-level numbers. It's not 1 or 2%. It's usually a double-digit number. I haven't, Jim, do you know of anyone who does above 25%? I don't think anyone does. You know, Indiana, Ohio, Tennessee, they're the ones that really, they don't use percentages. They use hard numbers.
Right.
They use numbers to say we're going to incent Pell, for example. We're going to incent community colleges transferring students to four-year institutions. So it's those that have the culture that they know what who their institutions are. They tie it to mission, for example, the mission of the institution. And then on top of that, they reevaluate it every year and they reassess and try and figure out what's your campus's role in this investment strategy for our state or our Commonwealth? I mean, that's the overall common theme, would you think?
Yep. We're going to have to get to, I want to think about what you want to tell this board about what they can do as a board, a coordinating board in Illinois, working with our partners to advance it. But I did want to talk a little bit about, we've talked about financial aid, we've talked about developmental ed, we've talked about preparation. But the piece, the game changer piece, Naomi, that's in there around guided pathways, you know, that in fact, you know, I know having been a faculty member for 20 years, you get students who come, when my son first went to college, I've never had so many texts from my son, and fortunately he had me, you know, because he kept asking me these questions like, what does this mean, or why, which course should I take, or how do I do this, and of course, but a lot of students that we're talking about don't have that resource, and yet we give them a course catalog that is thicker than the King James Bible, with 7 options to fulfill your math gen ed requirement, 8 options to fulfill your science gen ed option, and we just kind of let them pick and try to pick their way through that system. And I know a lot of what we've been working on with you in Complete College, I do know, I was just told, I haven't seen it yet, that one of our institutions now, their course catalog next year will not be a course catalog, it will be a pathways catalog. That when you open the book, what you will see are meta majors and pathways. That's all you'll see. So you'll be selecting on that basis, not picking courses here and there. And the idea is that we need to set clear, we need to reduce choice, I guess is the word. So maybe we could talk a little bit about another area where we need to be pushing, which is the way we deliver our education, making it more transparent and structured for students who don't have that support structure. And any of you may have some thoughts on that.
Well, let me quickly say, so once again, my Vanna. On page 20, we go into what guided pathways to success is in the book. And the reason why it's critically important, as Jim said. The first and foremost is, what we love about it is that it honors faculty. It is essentially taking the course catalog that faculty have laid out to say if you're a comp lit major, if you're an engineering major, we as faculty, not me, but you know, Bill as a faculty member says this would be a great sample course of study. The other big thing about it is it ensures that there's no issue with regards to wasted credits. It ties into this whole idea of the behavioral economics of creating defaults. So that's what students currently do, as Jim has outlined, is they wander the curriculum. You give them that fat book, they try and pick out which courses they need. The next thing you know, they've taken 20 to 30 credits above what it is they need. Nothing more heartbreaking than going to a graduation audit and you realize that the student is missing like 40% of what's needed and has 140 credits. You know, we hear horror stories like that all the time, and in part it's because it's not really created to tie what faculty have created with the back end of what the campus does in terms of programs of study. So quickly on page 22, it essentially lists what we know to work at GPS. If you create defaults for all of these, students will persist and succeed. What's great about all of this is it doesn't have to cost $10,000 million, as sometimes it tends to do. A lot of this can be supported by Banner and PeopleSoft, as many of you know. Or you can use a pivot table, which is what Florida State did. Florida State University and Georgia State University have eliminated, well, Georgia State has eliminated their equity gap. Entirely eliminated their equity gap using guided pathways to success and the data that they said that they've been able to find. So quickly, whole programs of study, just have that set. So whether you're a 2-year institution, a 4-year institution, you're doing a 1-year cert, you need to provide your student on the front end every class that they need to take as their default schedule. And then the student can then go in and pick and say, I don't want this one or this one or this one. The key is, though, they can't drop any of the courses that they want. It's specific courses that they're allowed to switch out. The milestone courses, if I'm a nursing student and I decide I want to drop Biology 101, A&P, and Toxicology, I don't think I'm any longer a nursing student. And those are the kind of things that should trigger your registrar's office. Some people have really high-end systems where it triggers it so bad that it cuts off the student's meal plan. You're getting ready to drop your Physics 101 class. You need to see your advisor immediately. Others use an Excel table to just tell students, are you aware of these things? The big thing is, too, is we talked a little bit about the murky middle, so that students are going to your advisors who are overworked. That's a national trend. That's an international trend. There's no way that 1 to 600 ratio of advisor to student, there's no way. There's absolutely no way you can do that without some sort of technology or some type of structure to help you with this. And really, the key other big one is this idea of a meta major. These unclassified majors, we know that they struggle and they just wander. They wander your curriculum. They have no strong first-year academic experience, which is critical that they do. And then math, aligning math. Everyone knows Yuri Treisman or may know him. He's Mr. Fantastic. I love him. Down at the Charles Dana Center at UT Austin. And what Yuri and his team and the folks at the Carnegie Foundation have quickly found out is that, oh my God, we've been sending students to take algebra, and those are the students that really are only going to the STEM fields and getting ready for calculus. Let them do their algebra in high school, but without question, if the student is not going to be lined up for calculus, you know, that nursing student would do better with statistics. Political science, students would do better with statistics. They can do quantitative reasoning, but it's all of these pieces, everything that we've said, they all have to be interrelated and interdependent. So you're eliminating the guessing game for the students. I think what's kind of cool about all this is that GPS kind of handles the academic part, and then what Bill and others have mentioned around the financial aid part, that's the part that can help incent all of this. And so I'll pause there.
Okay. All right, well, let me just ask, we always try to wrap up all of these panels with the same question, which is, we talked a little bit this morning about our board, and obviously we do the budget for higher education, we keep the data for higher education, we do all the things coordinating boards do, we approve the academic programs, which you're going to get to in just a moment. But from the perspective, from your perspective, having working in the state, looking at cross states, what are some of the key things this board should be looking at that we can do to push the ball down the field, to implement truly game-changing policies and practices that are going to start closing these gaps? As you mentioned, Omi, there are institutions, some in Illinois, like your institution, are making enormous progress. Outside the state, you mentioned Georgia State, 5 or 6, 7 years ago had big gaps. Don't have them anymore. So it's not like this is magic sauce or rocket science. It is hard work. It does require us to realign our institutions around the students rather than keep trying to fix the students to match our institutions. So when you talk about those pathways, one of the things you didn't mention to me was that you have to make sure if you're going to give that student that pathway, you offer the courses in that pathway when they're called for. I had one provost tell me this story where they realized that a certain number of students in these pathways needed a certain math course at a certain time. And they looked at their catalog and realized they didn't offer that math course at that semester. And so he called up the chair of the math department. He said, why aren't we offering this course? And the answer was, well, the faculty who teach that prefer to teach it in the spring, and they don't teach it in the fall because they've got these other things to do. Well, the answer of the provost was, that is not the answer that I wanted. What I want from you is I'll give you 3 weeks, and you come back and tell me how you're going to offer 16 sections to this course, which is how many students we have that need it next fall. And let me know. And so, you know, it does, we teach courses when students need them, not when we want to teach them. As a faculty member, I understand what a radical shift that is. And there's a whole lot of things we need to do. But again, let me quit preaching here and talk a little bit about, from your perspective with this board and what you know about it, what should we be zeroing in on from a policy and practice perspective to turn this widening gap situation around?
Well, I think there has to be communication throughout the student's educational career between all the different players within an Illinois education, from K through higher education. When you look at the statistics and the data, the students who are not performing actually are doing just as well in 3rd grade. I mean, they have the same abilities, but there are pieces that are missing, and you have to figure out how to make all of the pieces talk together and to look at where they go. So number one, I think the system has to work as a whole. Number two, I think there has to be a strategic plan, a particular strategic plan and particular goals to create this remediation. And the third thing is honestly the very simple thing. You need to understand these students. You can't simply say, I need to give you the information or provide the information, because for many of them, it takes more. They have to feel it and be a part of it. And it doesn't take just one touch. Math Grant is a good example. We have over 200 students in the Transition Academy, and we work with them for once a month to get them ready when they're seniors to apply to college. We still have a very, very, very challenging time getting their parents to fill out a FAFSA and for these students to apply before MAP funding has disappeared. And that's a real problem if you're ever going to meet the needs of the student population. You need to understand how they think and what they need.
I would just perhaps recommend to the board that there's a difference between advocacy and adoption. And what adoption does is create stickiness. It makes it stick. And it ensures that all of your institutions benefit from whatever it is you decide to support in any of these game changers, whether they're the low-hanging fruit ones where it's just, again, what SIU did is they put a little ticker around 15 to finish, that if you do 30 credits a year, that you're going to finish on time, and they saw an uptick in one semester of students who decided to take 15 credits or more. So for us, this idea of stickiness really ensures that all of your institutions, those that are struggling with resources and those who are well endowed with resources, at least that there's this great glide path in terms of what can be done. We know that Illinois, for example, already has language on credit creep, this idea of that, not too many credits. That's a great example. And so if the board wanted to think about supporting any of these game changers, or not just CCA's game changers, there are a lot of people in this space. You just want to support something that's going to show double-digit gains, that's supported by data, that really helps the majority of your students at the majority of your campuses. If you don't, then you're kind of just tinkering at the margins, and it's not really going to be as effective to get as many Illinoisans moving forward.
Never ask a researcher what you should do. I'll be straightforward about it. I think the board should exploit the research talent it has in the state so that it can inform itself about its progress towards its stated goals and activities. And when you design a system, a strategic plan that is designed to get us from where we are to where our aspirations are, then you actually have the talent in the state, right down the street, right here on campus, that can give you good projections about how you can target your activities to impact those populations that are going to be needed to get to those aspirations. That really requires a good data system, but a data system that's driven in part by the kinds of questions that you need answers to. that allows you as a board to inform yourself and the state about the progress we're making at educating our citizens and seeing that they get credentials. Now, I want to make a point here about the credential issue. If we don't pay attention to who's getting what credential, we can still build in some persistent disparities. And I think it's extremely important. We have the capability to have an education system that facilitates mobility for all of our communities. But if all of the people who constitute maybe 30% of the new credentials are getting credentials at the lowest level of that ladder, we don't really impact the intergenerational change as much as we could. So knowing where our resources are going and who's consuming our credentials in the state is going to be an important part of that. But you need a system in place that, number one, articulates what those aspirations are and how you plan to get there, and then you inspect for what you expect. So I think those two things go hand in hand. We're well along the way in developing a PK-20 data system. I think monitoring how that's being accomplished is really good. And then the last thing is we have to advocate more for MAP. If we can make progress in getting MAP back to where it serves the way it once served, we will make a substantial difference in being able to meet need for students being able to have a successful participation in higher education.
I would echo, obviously, all the recommendations that have been given. I think they're really excellent. I would say that you're in a unique position to communicate differently about the need for an investment in education than what we've done in the past. As we move into this budgeting, we have been in budgeting for results, but this idea of what's the return on investment? And I think, we've discussed some of the scenarios that you're building, and I think that's right on. It's communicating differently. What is the cost to the state of inadequate funding or doing nothing? If we simply did nothing, if we stayed at the status quo, what does it cost us? What does it cost us in future revenue, in our tax base? When we look at, for example, all the students who are paying all of this money and not leaving the institutions with any credits whatsoever, that's a tremendous hit to our asset base, to a family asset, individual asset. We're losing so much. How do we capture that and begin talking about an investment in education from that sort of perspective, from some real numbers, some real costs? I think you'll have an opportunity there to maybe begin to dissuade others who may not even think about it in that way, and I think that's really important. I think definitely facilitating the process of ownership of the 60% by 2020 goal. Who owns it? And Dr. Applegate has raised this question. Who owns it? What part does IBHE own? What part does the individual institutions own? What part do the other state institutions own? So thinking about that, at the regional level, what does that mean? Identifying the incentives, the carrots. I think with the great members of this board and the great, partnerships and relationships that you have with others, it's really identifying what are the incentives, what are the carrots, and then where do we inject them? Where do we inject them? Is it in performance funding? How do we do that? Facilitate the data availability, because it's one thing to provide the data to the institutional researchers, and we've got some great researchers across this state that can do great work with it. But part of the problem from the state perspective is that we don't have an easy way to provide the researchers with the information. So how do we do that? And that's part also in terms of what IBHE is able to collect. I know that you're like 2 years behind, and it has a ticket, it has a cost to it, but I think it has to be done. Lift up the best practices. What's working? That's not really a monetary cost to that, but lift up. You did it here today by bringing this panel together. How do we get this information out to the colleges, the universities, and even educational advocates who will be interested in learning more about these? And I think we talked about this earlier, and it didn't come up in the conversation, and that's to create a recognition program for those institutions that are making a difference. And I think that's really important because, we started out even today's meeting by applauding those 3 institutions that were recognized for their efforts in diversity. So why couldn't we do that at the state level? And it's a way of also lifting up the best practices.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Let's thank our panel for a good conversation.
Thank you again. Next, we're going to turn to program reviews. So as everyone shuffles for a second, I'm going to ask Dr. Cullen to come forward.
I did bring some Latino demographic profiles that we put together at the commission and some pretty interesting legislative maps that show Latino growth and change. So I'm going to leave them here for those of you who are interested.
All set?
Go ahead.
Okay, I will begin with the tally count as usual. Madam Chairwoman, we have included in the memo a listing of all pending academic program and authorization proposals submitted to the board through September 19th. Since then, no additional proposals have been received. 27 applications have been withdrawn since the last board meeting. As of Friday, October 3rd, no new requests for program modification have been received. Madam Chairwoman, item 7 requests approval of 13 associate degree programs offered at 11 community colleges. The degree programs included in this item have been approved by the Illinois Community College Board. I now offer this item for consideration.
Are there any questions or discussion? Is there a request to list each of these out and to state them individually? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Madam Chairwoman, item 8 requests approval of 1 baccalaureate degree program at 1 independent institution. I now offer this item for consideration.
And since this is a short list, I'll just note that it's Benedictine University, a Bachelor of Science in Nursing in the North Suburban region. Are there any questions or any discussion? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries.
Madam Chairwoman, item 9 requests approval of 6 baccalaureate degree programs, 3 graduate degree programs, and 1 center at 5 public universities. I now offer this item for consideration.
Any questions or discussion or requests to list them out individually? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Before we turn to the consent agenda, I just want to acknowledge, I just learned recently that Dr. Susan Friedberg is retiring. She was the DeVry University representative and also the chair of the Proprietary Advisory Council. Sorry, I'm speaking away from you, but just want to thank you for your leadership, for your service, and just say how much I enjoyed working with you. And congratulations, and we will miss you, but wanted to acknowledge the great work in your leadership. So thank you very much. Now we turn to the consent agenda, and I'll begin by listing and note, I know that we'll be breaking out at least one of these items. So I'll begin by noting that looking at the consent agenda, am I looking at the right item numbers? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm gonna pull. Okay. Got it. So items 10, the board meeting minutes from August 5th. 11, the fiscal year 2014 final financial report. Item 12, the fiscal year 2015 financial report as of August 31st. And the public university, item 13, non-instructional capital project approval. And item 14, appropriation transfers for fiscal year 2015. So I'm listing these out just because, and then also the executive session minutes, item 17. So is there a motion to approve the items I just listed on the consent agenda? Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Those items are approved. Next, we'll turn to item 15, proposed amendments to personnel policies. This was an item, a discussion of a document that the board had yesterday. Is there any discussion on this item, or is there a motion?
Second.
And I will just first make a note, I think what the board discussed yesterday, and I would entertain a motion that would reflect that, that would allow me as chair to continue to make some changes and tweaks and amendments to the document, but that you would approve it and allow me an opportunity to make those changes. So I would tweak that motion a little bit and...
I move approval with that.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. It's approved. Next, I'll just make a note of item 16, expectations for and review process of executive director. We had a great discussion. We're going to continue to refine that document and bring it back to a future meeting. So with that, I'll move on just to note an informational item that should be available, the Illinois Transfer and Articulation Initiatives Annual Report from 2014 through 2015. I'm close to adjournment. Before I get there, any questions or discussion or any other comments from board members? Thank you for a great meeting. It was great to see all of you in Chicago, close to home, and look forward to seeing you at our next meeting on December 2nd at the University of Illinois at Springfield. Look forward to hearing from the Disabilities Advisory Committee, our guests. Is there a motion to adjourn? Second?
Second.
All in favor? We are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Oh, yeah, we will. Absolutely.